Hi guys and welcome. This is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast. Today, we have Warren Falcon joining us, an amazing counselor, Jungian-oriented counselor who has taught dream workshops. I was very lucky to come across his work, and I was affected by it in an enormously positive way. So thank you, Warren, for coming.
My great pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it. See what we dream up together.
Yes.
Hopefully inspire others to really not shy away from dreams, but to go, oh, I can't wait to go home and sleep and dream tonight.
Absolutely. Now, how does, you approach this in a very interesting way. And a lot of people in the past, I think, have been like, oh my God, analyzing dreams, because Freud has such a take on dreams that is centered around the context of neurosis. How is Jung different?
Jung has a different view of neurosis. He doesn't shun the word, but it says neurosis is actually based upon a deeper, much deeper, mysterious foundation called archetypes. Primal patterns that seem to be innately woven into the fabric and tissue of reality. Mm-hmm. And so that when we confront our complexes, to use that word that he also uses, in fact, Jung coined the term, and complexes are like emotion-based, feeling-based kind of coagulatio, knots in our psyche and in our sometimes conscious mind. So when he worked with a neurosis or a complex, he was always aware that in every neurosis or complex, and I'll speak it like Joseph Campbell would because he learned it from Jung, is a god or a goddess or a primal pattern myth that is based in mystery, but also reveals the primal patterns. So a neurosis is a way in. We're here. We have our personal story. We're never born into, as a guy named R.D. Laing, who was a psychoanalyst and therapist in the last century, who wrote a great book called Knots, K-N-O-T, and knots, complexes, but knots, analysis. Etymologically, the root meaning of a word, analysis or lucis, means untying, loosening the knots. Ana is a knot. So R.D. Laing says that we're never born into the first act. We're always born into the second act and then the preceding act. So when you and I are born, it's not like, and some say, yeah, it's the first act for ourselves, but we're born onto a stage that is set. We're born into a particular family, space, place, and time, culture, and all of that. So we inherit knots. We inherit, I like to call them creative knots because they're ultimately very creative. As you've done in your own life, as I find, you sometimes have to unwind enough to get to the creativity, but something is trying to be created.
Part of the healing process, and this is what we explore here on Not As Crazy As You Think, alternatives to healing, it's going within. And, it's funny that you mentioned R.D. Laing because he's really an advocate of a new interpretation outside of psychiatry.
Yeah.
He does critique it a lot. And, I think that's one of the problems with people trusting in this collective unconscious. They tend to be a little careful about, embracing it because it seems a little bit non-medical.
Yeah.
But it's really silly because this is really the essence of humanity.
Right. And it's not either or.
Right.
It's either medicine or superstition.
Right.
Or anything like that. Superstition means world religions, private religions, locally on the other side of the mountain. Those folks have their gods and we have ours. It's all in there. They're all products, including modern medicine, as we have it, are all products of what we're talking about.
Right.
From the unconscious of the psyche. Psyche means soul, but this depth dimension, which is what differentiates Jung from Freud. Freud stayed at one level. He was accurate in the sense that there is a personal unconscious, Virginia, but his view of the unconscious is that the ego actually repressed, unwanted, the discontents of ourselves and our bad habits or our nasty genitalia or whatever it may be, all that stuff gets down, and that was it. And so when Freud unpacked the unconscious, and Jung does it too, but he understands that there is this deeper level that below the personal unconscious is what he called the transpersonal unconscious, the beyond personal, or the archetypal, this rich, mysterious depth dimension that ultimately is what we're trying to say when we say quantum physics and field theory, all the different languages and words that have been used throughout religion, this mystical but accessible via images and words and dreams and the contents of culture, cave drawings, carvings on bones, early grave sites where they find flowers from 100 miles away in the deserts of Iran. That meant somebody had to go get those flowers and bring them to put over the little prince that died. Symbolic acts, significant symbols there. So, so Jung is not against unpacking your mother stuff or your father stuff or your inherited racial stuff or whatever. That's our second act.
Right.
And then the second act is about, when we're born, is what all animals do, from parameciums in their own way to ourselves, is it's about growing up, which means an infant has to grow an ego, develop an ego. So the caretaking of the mother and the father and the community and the family is creating, a Jennifer and a Warren. But this beginning, all this neurochemical stuff gets the little neural nets going, and then suddenly there's this awareness of I and other, I and mother, this kind of thing. And so then it's the process of just literally biological and psychological ego maturation. But early on, your earliest memories are like dreams because, there's no ego really solid yet. But those early memories, what were the things that frightened you? What was your favorite fairy tale or cartoon or story? What activities did you get drawn toward? This kind of thing. It's all that's that myth, the mythology of your personal self unfolding. So Jung says it's all, and under all of that is the underlay of the unconscious, the collective unconscious, all those primal patterns out of which we come uniquely, individually. There'll never be another one of you ever or me. And so we're here to unfold our relationship, not only to this level that we're meeting on, but the wake up for Jung is that there is a rhizome, like the plant lives that live on the rhizome, that our egos rise up out of that. We are plants.
Right.
Could I read you a statement about Jung? This is from his Memories, Dreams, Reflections, his autobiography.
Perfect.
And I'll send you a list of people want to read and stuff like that. And a lot of these books are online. But Jung says, life is all, and I borrowed rhizome from just reading this, life has always seemed to me like a plant that lives on its rhizome. Its true life is invisible, hidden in the rhizome. See, already you're in Jungian land. That part that appears above ground lasts only a single summer. Then it withers away, an ephemeral apparition, I think, for more than just that, but in the context of time. When we think of the unending growth and decay of life and civilizations, we cannot escape the impression of absolute nullity. Yet I have never lost a sense of something that lives and endures underneath the eternal flux. What we see is the blossom which passes. The rhizome remains. We are an expression of a unique, temporal, meaningful expression of the rhizome. We're a unique incarnation of that rhizome, that mystery out of which we come.
It's so much more compassionate and like self-affirming, this kind of approach to looking at life and our relationship to it. And I found so much more of who I was on the inside when I took a moment to really take care of, investigation, self-investigation through symbols and dream symbols. And, unfortunately, a lot of what is pushed through the mental health system is not recognizing the Jungian approach.
Oh no, they're
And
sleight of
that's very
hand.
unfortunate.
Yeah, they just dismiss it, you
Yeah,
know.
they really do. They really do. And I don't know if that was always the case, because wasn't like Freud and Jung, they were kind of taking two different approaches, but they were both considered equal in weight, weren't they at one
Yeah,
time?
Freud was 19 years older than Jung.
Mm,
And he wrote his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, published it in 1900. So we've had 121 now
yeah.
years of that book. But Freud was a physician, a doctor, trained, did the chemistry of his day, as did Jung. He was a physician, and so he did not dismiss medicine at all. In fact, he says, I was not only a physician of bodies, but I also am a physician of souls or psyche,
Mm,
and the two are one. So you
right.
don't dismiss sleight of hand, or you say either or. And Freud was sort of only this approach, and it was medical. And what he did is he reduced the neuroses to just that personal level of the unconscious and our complexes. And you can get a lot of work there. We will work on that when we work
Sure.
together. We drink, you do that. Jung said, no, I don't disagree with that at all, but I have discovered, and my whole life has been, his whole life work, this is him as an old man saying, discovered and trying to gather the evidence throughout the history of humankind and human consciousness through the civilization and its discontents and its myth contents,
Right.
all of that stuff, and all the carvings on the bones and the rock drawings. They've just found these 15,000-year-old
Really?
stone drawings in Brazil,
Wow.
that after the end of the first ice age. And so there's incredible drawing. These are evidence that people were responding. Our ancestors were waking up and responding to
Right.
what they were doing here. And we can tell from their drawings, their carvings, their dwellings, all of that. Even
Right.
their diet and their bones and their dung and the garbage pits that they leave. So Jung says that's all underneath the rhizome. That's the deeper rhizome, if you will, of the personal unconscious. It's not just a garbage can. It's more
Yes.
than that. It includes all the so-called garbage and offal, but it's got the gods. It's got everything. It's all included. You can't shut out one, and you shouldn't. You can't. We can repress it. That was a big thing for Freud, repression, and we must learn to repress. I watched my nephew when he was like 3 or 4 pick up a brick in the backyard and hit his friend Tommy in the head because Tommy looked at his cookie.
Oh,
And so he needed to learn how to repress.
mm-hmm.
That's how we form. The ego is important and the repression is important, but there's this neurotic, pathological repression.
Right.
And get rid of all the mystery, or a lot of the mystery element of life, to me is, it's criminal in a way.
I totally agree with you there. I mean, because it's denying what we are as human beings, that natural connection to something other than ourselves. That's something we all could relate to. And if you deny that, there's denying what's in your mind, and then there's a lot less there that you're acknowledging as real. I think that's one of the problems. Like, people have this idea right now, this rational age has lasted a bit long, where, people are still saying, well, if I don't see it and touch it and feel it, and we can't all measure it together objectively, then it doesn't exist.
Right. That's the scientific materialistic paradigm that
Right.
started 400 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
People think the apocalypse archetype, is happening now, but that when the Renaissance happened and Alexander Pope, the great English poet, said, presume not God to span the proper study of mankind as man and its surrounding. So the gods fell out of heaven. They kind of, shoved them down into the unconscious. And Jung says, yeah, when you do that, it says they fall into your unconscious. They fall into human unconscious and show up as symptoms and symbols. They're going to have a life. They're going to live their lives either consciously or unconsciously. And as he said about things, you either live it consciously or it lives you.
Yeah.
Thus being mugged by complexes and archetypes. You can get mugged by them, and either on purpose or not, but we can get mugged. And then that's a wake-up call. I've certainly had those. It sounds like you've had some of those. Other
yeah.
people too. But so the Renaissance began this whole scientific, materialistic view of it's just matter. There's no metaphysics really. It's just let's do the science. And that was a development of human consciousness that needed to happen.
Right.
But we're now at the, let's say, the growing edge of that, where it's not either or. We get to do all the biochemical stuff. We get to do all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But now, we have quantum mechanics, and physicists have all discovered that, those early Hindus and those mystics way back when, they had their own language for it. Quantum field, well, they called it Atman, the self, capital S, the great containing ground of all beings. We have all these names for it. So they're beginning to meet, and they have been meeting. So Jung said Freud was nothing butism. He would take a dream and reduce it to, that's nothing but your mother complex. And just stay at the complex. And Jung says, no, but there's a mother archetype.
Right.
And we all partake of it, and we get personal mothers and personal fathers who mediate the transpersonal or the archetype of the mother father, but they're dressed up in drag as your mother and your father and your grandmother, your grandfather.
Yeah.
But that's why you're personal parents, and why we unpack. Well, tell me about your mother. Tell me about your father. Tell me about your what's your heritage? Oh, Siciliana, Falcon, Spanish, whatever. But to unpack it, because this is how eternity, Atman, quantum mechanical fields manifest up from the rhizome into the unique plant of individuals, of community, of cultures, of nations, of racial ethnicities, and all of that. It's all coming from the same, another image, massive underground river, out of which springs each other river and spring and well and stream and creek, as we say down south. So it's infinitely unfolding. It's all about creativity
and potentials, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of the quantum field. It's not really, anything locked in form.
Right.
I think it's so strange, because the quantum field is obviously it continues to be one of the most important advances, right? We keep learning more about it, but to take other areas of science, or I should say psychology of the mind, and not unite it within the same principles, it just seems to me to be like such an ignorant thing, because we're ignoring something that is so part of who we are in our fabric, in everything that we believe and feel.
Yeah, and it's a depotentiating. I was going to say castrating. It's a castration of the word psychology. Psyche means soul.
Right.
Hello, soul.
Right.
And ology or logos means pattern. Logos, logic, all that pattern, and word. So the very word psychology is a religious word, in the sense that the word religion, I love words, and I like the etymology, the roots, the archetypal roots of words. Mm-hmm. Religio, re means again or back. And ligio, well, what do we have? Ligaments, relinks, connections, joiners, connectors, connect back to primal originating sources.
Right.
So the very word itself, that psychology is a religious word. And the word therapy, just to go on with etymology, but it all connects here, because it is a religious function, because the psyche does have a religious function. That's what Jung discovered or articulated for us as moderns. So the word therapy actually is a noun. In ancient Greece, there were therapeutes, individual men and women, and therapeutes were those who attended the gods in the temples. There's all this religious connection to the very words that have been kind of denatured. Yeah. Demythologized, myth meaning the real stuff, not myth is a false thing. Right. That's what science did. Myth is just quaint little fairy tales. Teach a little bit about the mind, but that's it. But the very word psychology, religion, therapy, therapeutes. I am a therapeute. You and your podcast, you as an art, all art came out of the whole religious eruption of humans. Carved on walls and carved blocks and rocks and stuff. That's religio, connecting back to meaning. And that's the other big word in Jungian psychology that Freud didn't poo-poo it either. What's the meaning of a dream? What's the meaning of my life? What's the
Right.
meaning of the artwork behind your head there? This kind of thing. What is meaning? The search for meaning. We make meaning is what humans do,
Right. Right.
and we find it. But Jung is like, no, this is all connected. So we wake up to it. And when we wake up in a dream and we're having a dream, we wake up in a dream, or you have a daydream or a fantasy. Jung discovered, he was making mandalas, even where the hole is. So we have holes, and WHOLES, mandalas are about our wholeness. How do you hold it all together?
Yeah, I saw that in he was talking about that in that book that you told me to look at, Memories, Dreams, Reflections.
Yeah, his autobiography.
Yeah, and I thought it was fascinating that you mentioned too that he had this personal crisis that was almost like he was falling into this feeling of madness, and he was dealing with visions and these dreams that, were a little terrifying to him.
A lot terrifying, because he grew up with a mother who had suffered breakdowns throughout his entire life, as a
Oh.
child and a teenager, and he had a cousin who was a psychic, but she was also in and out of psych hospitals. So she sat close. Jung, I like this term. My analyst told me this when I first started working with him. He said, Warren, I see you sit very close to the unconscious. Some of us don't. We're all in the unconscious, but some of us, you sit close to the unconscious. You didn't sign, you didn't fill out a form and apply, or maybe in some other mid limbo place. But I sit close, but some people don't.
Right.
I'm an intuitive. I'm introverted. Now extroverts can be intuitive, but extroverts can sit close to the unconscious. Artists have a relationship to the unconscious.
Oh, absolutely.
Artists, all kinds, whether it's feeling and you're working that feeling dimension in dance or music. So sitting close to the unconscious is really, it's about waking up to it and doing dream work and doing artwork and all that.
Do you think there are certain archetypes that lean more towards being on the edge of unconscious? Like that's almost like their calling in life, people who take those archetypes on, like in their personality?
Well, art.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that that's the case, being, accessing that artist in me. I mean, I go into those realms that sometimes I can't get back, and that's when the problems occur. But I go into the areas I feel like that are so nebulous and, in that immaterial realm. And that's where I find the information. I'll bring it back. Otherwise, I can't access it.
Yeah, you're a psychonaut.
Yeah. I like that. I like that better than the bipolar comment.
Yeah, well, see, that's the medical, and they like to parse it out and they want to define the behavior with the intention we will project that they're trying to do something good and help end some human suffering and all of that. But at the same time, they're just dismissing, I call it sleight of hand, casually, but a sleight of hand where they're shaving off a whole primary tissue and fabric of existence, of human existence and all existence.
It is a crime.
Right. So you sit close to the unconscious, and some of us have no choice.
Right.
Now, I used to work for Duke University Psych Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. And so it was very expensive. It was for the 1s and 2s percenters, it was one of the most experimental hospitals in the nation. So it wasn't all medical. They had art, there was music, all of these things.
That's so nice.
But I knew I was already a mystic, and I was already kind of dealing with my own in and out with stuff, in terms of, being mugged by the unconscious, as I call it. Mm-hmm. Some of us have no choice. We get mugged, and some do, apparently, or they can block it and shield it and stuff. But being in the wards was fascinating, was amazing, sad, heartbreaking, terrifying. But that's where I saw the psyche manifest. Like one day, was an adolescent unit I worked on for a while, but one guy had a complete what's called a psychotic break. I call it a mugging by the gods, and suddenly, and there were other nurses and stuff there, and it was on the ward, and there were patients. He started channeling my life and my secrets. I mean, it was a prophet.
I've seen them all. I'm so much better connected to this unbelievable realm.
It comes from the depth dimensions of the psyche, and when your ego, I've used this analogy, and it's not pleasant, as you well know, but when your ego is just one scrap of paper whirling around in a whirlwind of the psyche, of the archetypal psyche,
Right.
that's where the problem is.
For those people who are on the edge of the unconscious and in that area where madness takes hold, they're the ones who really have the power to tell the story of the human spirit. And yet they are automatically written off by today's medical standards as not having a connection to anything that's valuable or real, or like we have to be kind of, locked up and medicated. To me, that's the heartbreak, because those people who I've been with on the inside, I don't really experience that much of a connection like that on the outside with people, because everyone's so, I guess, addicted to the rhythms of what our material society say is normal.
Right. Well, so the fantasy of science, the chief operating fantasy of science is, and psychology as one of in the medical establishment, is control.
Right.
And so they're actually frightened.
Right.
And it's understandable. It's frightening when you get mugged. You can live the dark side of an archetype and the archetypal terrors. You get filled with these things, and it can be a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the gods, says many ancient scriptures. So control, dismissal, fear, but it doesn't go away. It just goes deeper into the unconscious, and that which you repress, says Jung, you're doomed to live individually and culturally as fate.
Right.
Now, he didn't say doom, but when I read that, I said, we're doomed because we're going to repress something. We are scared, and life is frightening.
Right.
There is scary, and the psyche can take over. We get mugged by emotional states. Depression is a mugging, many kinds of things, and it can be very, very frightening. So all of our religions and our arts grow out of this early religious primal response.
Right.
That was already symbolic, drawing on cave walls, even carving on bones and rearranging rocks in a certain way, or like Lascaux and Chauvet, those caves in Spain and in France, where they found bear four bones and a bear skull placed 25, 30,000 years ago, and where all those cave drawings are.
Oh,
that is a religious act.
Right.
And the sacred was the animal powers. Joseph Campbell writes about this beautifully in many of his works. The sacrality of the way of the animal powers.
There is a living intelligence. What does the spider contain that is so much deeper? For him, I can't access that unless I really access, the intelligence of the animal itself. And there's a lot to be learned in those areas.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Wendy Ashley, she's retired now, was a mythic astrologer. She studied with Joseph Campbell and Charles Ponce and other. Really amazing. She created something called mythic astrology. It's all about the myths and stuff. I mean, she knew like 7 different skies, from the Greek skies to the Persian skies to the Lakota Sioux skies, the Passamaquoddy skies up there near Canada, this kind of thing. Wow. And she said, if you want to know what an animal symbolizes, say you dream of it or you keep encountering it, and we all have primal mind, we have access to it, so use it. That's what you do if you're going to be a shaman. We all have an inner shaman, or that's a venue that we have. She said, look at their behavior. Look at the behavior of the animals. So you mentioned a spider. So we got a spider in the house. We have a power animal in the house. And spider, well, what do? Well, it's really remarkable. Out of them comes their food source, where they live, their most protected self. They can weave themselves up in their cocoon and the web and all of that. So early on, they were called dream makers and storytellers.
Right.
Storytelling medicine.
Right.
Medicine. They create these out of themselves.
Right.
So self-creation, and it comes out of them. Boy, can our imaginations wrap around that? Yeah.
Again, what you're talking about is the land of imagination. And again, for me, It almost to me holds a lot more evidence scientifically, even though, I believe that if you get a million people together and they all share their anecdotes, that to me is more scientific than if one person is interpreting a
Oh,
couple words that someone's saying and then making a general statement about the whole thing. I mean, I don't see the value in that. It's it's much more subjective.
yeah, and you're actually being very Jungian because that's what Jung did. He says, I can't, everybody wanted to know, especially in the scientific medical culture with its reductive and reduces everything down to
Right.
nothing. But that's a God wish. God is a big projection of a wish fantasy.
Right.
But Jung says, no, he says, I can't prove to you one way or the other that there is really a God. But I do know that there are God images, and they showed up very, very early. Now, what the medical model or scientific reductive model does, it says, well, no, that's not true. Those things don't exist at all. It's just a sign. We reduce symbols to signs.
Right.
See, this whole thing that psychology and medicine wants to kind of control everything.
Right.
We're talking about this aspect.
Right.
But you can't control it.
We're bankrupt in this nation because we ignore a lot of what makes things meaningful in terms of symbols, in terms of that otherworldly aspect that's outside of the scientific materialist perspective.
Yeah, we long for it, and a lot of us are taught not to, and sometimes now the tragedies that we don't even know, or we just dismiss it.
Right.
But where it shows up?
Mental illness.
Okay, mental illness. That's what I said. Like when the gods, meaning the sacred dimension, when the sacred, which dwells and does dwell in even the profane world, the energy. It's quantum. It's physics. That there's energy in all things. Even quote with dead matter. They thought it was dead, nothing but dead. That's the Newtonian view of the universe.
Yes,
it's still going, and science actually operates out of somewhat still, but there is all the new science, which is great. But if you're not conscious of it, but there is a longing, and it shows up, as I was going to say, when Jung said that when the gods fell out of heaven at the beginning of the Renaissance, they didn't disappear. They fell into our psyches, down to the unconscious, and they show up as symptoms, mental illness.
Right.
But mental illness, all illnesses are an attempt to get us back reconnected to the depth dimensions of the psyche. And where there's a symptom, there's a symbol. Symptom and symbols are actually, symptoms are symbols. They are fingers that point. They direct.
Any artist who is dealing with, say, the psychiatric institution and being put on certain meds, it kills the creativity.
Yeah.
So the very thing that connects us to that deep sense of joy and meaning for our own lives, we're called to professions and actions based on our hidden talents. And if you just don't acknowledge that those things are valuable, all the artists are just written off.
Yeah. And that's criminal. It really, and it can murder souls.
Yes.
We're here.
Right.
As primal, creators, the imagination is not just, that's the imagination. Jung writes about it, but many people have written about it long before Jung. The imagination is real.
Right.
Virginia. First is mind, capital MIND, meaning the imaginal, the creator, the matrix mind. And out of that flows that this realm is the last fact.
Right.
We're searching for a primal living connection with the living powers of the universe. We want our own personal connection. So Jung worked with alcoholics. He said, oh, I know it. They're into spirits. There's a spirit in the bottle.
Yeah.
That connection, that deep, it's not just spirit as an airy fairy, but deep primal connection. When you get out into the deserts, you get onto a mountaintop or get up by the ocean, and then it's deep.
Now, do you think like part of us running away and towards addictions is us trying to deal like with our shadow selves or deny it? Or like when does that come into play in a healthy way? Figuring out how to integrate.
Yeah, because what happens often, depending on the substance or the sacred substance, they're sacred. They get us in touch with the sacred, and Jung is not New Age, although the New Age kind of copped Jung in a lot of ways, but the New Age is very naive and optimistic.
Right.
And Jung was like, no, what you need is, to be revalued. You want a renewed connection to life as it is. And what you're looking for is where you least want to work and want to look at. You turn toward that shadow thing that's down in the unconscious, if you will, and it's projected out. We project the shadow, positive shadow, negative shadow. It's all projection. Our eyeballs are designed. It hits back here, and then it gets, and then the brain interprets what's out there. So when you are dealing with addictions, Jung called all addictions low-grade religions. Just make the religion conscious. What are you going for in the addiction? So if you're addicted to booze, well, there's a god in booze, Dionysus.
Right.
The god of ecstasy. But also the shadow side of ecstasy is the hangover or the liver disease the next day or the lifetime end, this kind of thing. There's two sides to an archetype. There's that kind of, we'll call it the good side, but there's also the terror and the dark side.
Right.
And that's why you need a strong ego.
Right.
A strong sense of self. And this is why when you go through shamanic training in the literal formal way, a lot of it's just about toughening up your ego.
Right.
In order to endure being confronted with archetypal forces and sources.
But see, it's interesting because psychiatry, and I always go back to this because I've suffered royally under this program, but it's funny because they destroy the ego.
Yeah.
Your ego is not essential. And in order for you to be healthy, it's to deny the thing that makes you up. You're
objectified into an object. T.S. Eliot, I think it's in The Wasteland, one of his big poems. He was a big poet in the early part of the last century, still a big tower. But it has a line about that, when you're left pinned like a specimen, like an insect, a bug's pinned to the wall, you look at butterfly collectors and then you go to an entomologist, and you see all these bugs.
Yes.
But you get pinned and pegged and that's it. And you're not going to get over it. Now that is murderous.
It is. And it's funny that you mentioned that because I used to work at the American Museum of Natural History. And I went one of the scientists was an entomologist, and he allowed me to come in and look at the lab. And it's pretty amazing because it's like, just a vast, playground of all these little pinned beetles and everything. And as soon as I got tagged with the psychiatric label, I was like, I feel like one of those bugs.
Back to the spider. We have the spider, but then the spider is this incredible creature that in the mythic imagination of our ancestors and still some of us, it's a symbol of the great mother creator, the great matrix mother. Right. And she has a good side and she has a not so bad side. I spent 9 months during what I call the sequester semester for COVID upstate in the mountains near Lake Placid. And the house was full of spiders. I had developed a relationship to a spider that was always crawling around in the stall while I sat on the john in the morning, but to watch the spider kill its fly or, so the negative side of an archetype would be the black widow spider that kills its prey in that sense. But you look at they're great mothers too. Yeah. So the spider is an archetype. So that'll be our medicine animal for this podcast.
I love it.
The weavings of time.
My God.
The shadow catcher, when you buy a Native American song catcher, they're shadow catchers too. But that's spider imagery. So the song is going to be caught.
Right.
And we can dream, the dream catcher, because dreams are webby, ephemeral like.
Right.
So we have a dream catcher to help us to remember.
I remember when I first started working with you, it was so difficult to remember these dreams. And so I have been out of practice these last few years, but it was so great. And I remember you giving us some advice as to how to remember those dreams in the morning.
Well, I remember one basic one is drink a glass of water before you go to bed.
Really?
So often enough, you'll wake up in the middle of a dream to go to the bathroom.
Right.
You can name your unconscious, give it a name, or to the great mystery, to the dream, great dreamer. Sometimes they call it DC for Dream Central, ground control to Major Tom, I'd like a dream, please. If you don't mind, this doesn't happen all the time, but I could also say, I'm really stuck in this place, this certain particular place, or I'm tired of this same old pattern and all of that. Please give me a dream. But you can incubate a dream. It's called dream incubation. The ancient Greeks, it's still there, Epidaurus, and other places in Greece and other cultures too. You can go and you would go in there, and it was a place that was charged with energy, and people would go and have their medicine dream because they wanted to be healed psychologically, emotionally, physically, and they would have a dream, and then there would be people that would help them interpret that dream. This is ancient.
Yeah.
But the idea is bringing your consciousness to it, and you're telling the unconscious, the uber conscious, the unconscious, that you do want to have a conversation, an ongoing relationship. And that's the thing with Jung, and Freud in his own way, but Jung said you cultivate a relationship.
For him, it was a little overwhelming to go into that darkness, to confront his unconscious, to try to figure it all out. And that was really inspiring to me, because I said to myself, he was saying, as a psychiatrist, like I'm dealing with this, psychic material that my patients are dealing with, but I'm willing to take it on and explore it, and, in this rational age, and figure it out. And there is so much more value to me personally from a person who is willing to do the work, the same work that he's requiring others to do.
If you ever read his Red Book, and I recommend, and it will require lots of readings, but he talks about it in that chapter 6, Confrontation with the Unconscious. Mm-hmm. He had to give up his scientific knowledge and certainty. He had to leave that behind. He had to, and it was terrifying.
It was terrifying
because he was in some sense going to put himself into the arms or the hands of these forces that he was going to lose control. He was going to let go of control. Remember, he would drop down. He would purposely close his eyes, and then he would feel himself falling, and he would land somewhere, and then he would be confronted with someone he had dreamed about, the big kingfisher that had kingfisher wings and horns and all that, and he would start to dialogue with them or whatever. But he was losing control, but he went consciously.
Yes. And
he also he certainly had a strong ego, but the fear of mental illness is that you lose your ego, you lose control, because our egos serve a purpose. If you're going to do this work, especially, you've got to have a strong, developed ego. Right. I'm not talking about, we talk about he's got ego, but you have to have a strong sense of self, a thick skin, a strong sense of self, because when you do go through shamanic things and this kind of doing dream work, or what Jung did, which is essentially shamanic, right out, and you are confronted with some really scary stuff.
Well, see, that's one of the problems that I always had, because I would go there just trusting the experience. But that's what's sad to me, because the system as it's set up today, they're looking to stop that experience. That's we're keeping you in remission type of approach.
That's the medical model.
Instead of, I guess, standing beside someone and allowing them to go through it. And I just think that it's because they're not trained to do it that way.
No, it's allopathic. Allopathic medicine is you go out and you cut out. You got a tumor, cut it out.
Right.
Or zap it, or this. But it's excision. Now, sometimes it needs to happen, but that whole basic default cuts off a very vibrant and meaningful source.
Yes.
And you have to understand it, that mental illness is actually an encounter with God. Janet O'Dallett, the late, great Janet O'Dallett, was an amazing Jungian analyst. I, years ago, wish I'd found her, and because I wanted to go study with her, because she felt the need to not leave Jungian psychology, but she wanted to go deeply. She wanted to work with it more deeply, and she got into Native American stuff, and she wound up moving up to the northwest part and having closer access to Native American and the land and nature and all of that. And she encountered a woman. Dallett wanted to paint. She was a painter avocationally, but she wanted to really. So she signed up to do an exchange, some free Jungian analysis for art lessons. So this woman named Sarah showed up.
Nice.
And in the course of getting to know Sarah, Sarah begins to tell her story, and all these tragic events happen. Her mother was killed in a car accident, and then every 5 years on the anniversary of the mother's death, she has a shamanic dismemberment. We call it a psychotic break.
Right.
But she had been hospitalized, she'd been medicated and all of that, and then she would come back. But every 5 years, this would turn around. Now, Janet Dallett was already going, okay, I think there's a hidden contract here. There's a reason why she wanted painting lessons too with a Jungian analyst. And she said, well, tell me, Sarah, when was the last time you had the breakdown? She said, about 4.5 years ago. So she was heading toward breakdown. But right. She knew that Dallett, would work, Jungians work alternatively too. And so Dallett reluctantly, but then did have the dreams and everything else. But she gathered around her a group of Sarah's friends, educated them in some sense, however they're going to do that. When she had her shamanic descent, there would be 2 people with her.
That is
at all times. And they would be with her, and they would go through her, be present with her as links to this world,
right? Allowing
her to be with this world. And at some point, Dallett was with Sarah in those moments, and Sarah said, "Don't touch me! I'm radioactive."
Mm-hmm.
And Dallett said, "I am too. I'm radioactive too."
Oh,
making that bridge. Well, yes. The short of it, I get goosebumps all over. So I'm figuring this out. But, the short of it is that she came through.
Yeah, right.
From the other side.
Yes.
And she came back much more put together, strong sense of self, but she came back with gifts.
Yes.
Psychic gifts, artistic gifts, healing gifts, and she became a kind of medicine woman.
And to me, that sounds like an intuitive reaction.
Well, Jungians are also it's about the world of intuition. It's also doesn't deny any of the logos part of it and the training and all that, but you're actually, as you find, if you do dream work, you do get more intuitive.
Yes, you do.
And Dallett, was a trained Jungian, but also and had extreme intuition, and she knew the psyche because she's a Jungian analyst and had explored those realms personally. She learned what she did from John Weir, W-E-I-R, John Perry, P-E-R-R-Y, who developed this. He was a Jungian psychiatrist.
Is that John W. Perry?
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah, he explores a lot of what's really going on in psychosis.
Well, what she did with Sarah is what Perry did.
Right.
Work with people in, quote, psychosis, which I call openings and awakenings, potential openings and awakenings and empowerments of the conscious personality, who then has the ability to go back and forth between the worlds and knows how to prepare for that, blah, 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 and then deal with it.
Right.
But so she was her work is also based on John W. Perry.
Oh, nice. Well, Warren, I have to say, you are amazing. I am so happy that you were able to sit with us today. Are you offering any services? I know that you're still doing therapy and everything.
I work remotely, and once I get the Zoom thing down, and I am on FaceTime and Skype.
How can people find you?
You can email me at roofdweller, one word, ROOFDWELLER, roofdweller _ the little guion 2 at Yahoo, or all lowercase, Warren Falcon, lowercase, all one word, at gmail.com.
You are a true intercessor to the other side. We appreciate people like you. There's not enough of you, I swear. I'm so filled with inspiration right now. So thank you. Thank you very much.
That's what I wanted, to inspire people, get them excited. I want to go home and I want to dream.
Let's get dreaming tonight. Thank you, Warren.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.